Canyon Lake is losing 34 million gallons of water every single day. The viral claim is that the Texas Hill Country has less than 90 days before the taps run dry. The real picture is more tangled than a countdown, and in some ways, more alarming. How does a lake, in one of the fastest growing parts of America, reach the point where a water company refuses to hook up 9 whole neighborhoods because it cannot promise the faucets will? It starts with 2 forces that have been building for years. One of them is underground. The other is all over the real estate listings. And right now, in the Texas Hill Country, they are speeding toward each other. The Guadalupe River feeds Canyon Lake. It drains a water collection area stretching across 1,432 square miles of hill country limestone, gathering runoff from creeks and smaller rivers that cut through some of the most striking land in Texas. The Army Corps of Engineers dammed the river in the narrow canyon between 1958 and 1964, creating a lake built to hold 378,000 acre-feet of water at its full pool level of 909 feet. The dam itself stands 224 feet above the river bottom, making it the tallest earthen dam the Corps has ever built in Texas. Right now, Canyon Lake sits at 886 feet. That is 22 feet below where the water line is supposed to be. The lake is at roughly 59% of its normal storage, holding 223,000 acre-feet, instead of the 378,000 it was built to store. The surface area has shrunk from 8,308 acres to 5,828. Boat docks that once floated at the water's edge now sit on cracked mud 30 feet from the shoreline. Those 22 feet of missing water did not vanish in a single season. Charlie Hickman, the head of engineering at the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, pulled the water intake records going back more than 100 years to understand how Canyon Lake reached this point. What he found rewrote the starting point. Canyon Lake should have taken in roughly 1.25 million acre-feet of river flow over the past 5 years. It took in about 220,000, less than 1/5 of what the system was built to collect. The total flow over the last 5 years marks the lowest river levels the Hill Country has seen since tracking began over a century ago. 100 years of data, and the last 5 years are the worst stretch in the entire record. The Guadalupe River upstream at the Spring Branch Gauge Station tells the same story in real time. Normal average flow at that point is 353 cubic feet per second. The current reading is 45. That is an 87% shortfall. The river that is supposed to be filling Canyon Lake is barely moving. And the 34 million gallons leaving the lake every day is actually the mild number. Through the fall of 2025, as heat held on deep into October and November, Canyon Lake was bleeding 75 million gallons per day. That is enough to fill 114 Olympic swimming pools every 24 hours. The rate slowed through the cooler winter months, settling to its current pace since January. As summer draws closer and heat pushes back above 100 degrees, water loss to the air will climb again. The lake's 5,800 acres of open surface acts like a giant pan baking under the Texas sun, and net water loss from lakes across the state is trending upward at roughly 1.1 inches per decade. The heat is not just refusing to break. It is steadily raising the rate at which lakes lose water, year after year, decade after decade. For a brief stretch last summer, it looked like the crisis might ease. On July 4th, 2025, massive hill country flooding dumped roughly 70,000 acre-feet into Canyon Lake in a matter of days. The lake jumped from its record low near 45% full to nearly 70%. Locals exhaled. Boat ramp reopening timelines started showing up on community Facebook groups. Marina workers began making calls to customers who had been waiting months to get back on the water. Then, the drought came right back within weeks. The lake was falling again at the same pace as before the flood. The Guadalupe Blanco River Authority's stance was blunt even as floodwaters were still settling. The drought was not over. One storm, even a record-breaking one, could not refill a gap that took 5 years to build. GBRA manages Canyon Lake through a 5-stage drought backup system tied to the lake's water level. Stage 1 kicked in during July 2023, when the lake dropped below 895 feet. As things got worse through 2024, GBRA moved up to Stage 2, then Stage 3, then finally Stage 4 when Canyon Lake fell below 880 feet. Stage 4 meant forced 15% cuts in water use for every large-scale buyer in the system. Cities, water companies, and factory users across the I-35 corridor were told to cut back or face fines. After the July 2025 floods briefly raised levels, GBRA stepped back to Stage 2, where large-scale buyers now run with a 5% cut target. Home customers in places like Cordillera Ranch and Comal Trace face tighter rules, with yard watering limited to once per week under their provider's Stage 3. The Edwards Aquifer Authority, working on its own, put in place 40 to 44% pumping cuts across its area. Those limits have helped slow the bleeding. They have not stopped it. In January 2026, water flowing into Canyon Lake measured just 24 cubic feet per second. Water flowing out was 63. The lake was still losing 34 million gallons every day, fed by a river that was not sending nearly enough to close the gap. And the limits only control how much water people take out. They do nothing about the drying, which in a Texas summer becomes the main force pulling the lake down. That stretch shows something key about the rock driving this crisis. Canyon Lake sits on karst terrain, a landscape built on Cretaceous limestone that was laid down when shallow seas covered central Texas over 100 million years ago. In the time since, slightly acidic rainwater has been eating that limestone from the inside out, carving a hidden landscape of caves, sinkholes, crack networks, and underground rivers beneath what looks on the surface like normal ranch land. This rock creates a water system that swings between wild extremes. When it rains hard in the hill country, water does not soak gently into the soil the way it does across most of the country. It vanishes. It pours through narrow paths into the limestone and races underground at speeds that can cover miles in a single day through channel systems that no surface map can predict. Flash floods one week, bone-dry creeks the next. The karst does not store water the way clay or sandstone does. It moves it, quickly, and often downward into deep water systems that surface lakes like Canyon Lake cannot reach. The Edwards Aquifer, which sits beneath much of the hill country and feeds the springs that keep the Guadalupe River flowing downstream of the dam, holds usable water in just 5% of its rock. For every 100 cubic feet of limestone, only 5 actually contain water you can pump. The aquifer fills up fast during storms but drains fast during drought. And in May 2025, it crossed a line no one had seen before. The Edwards Aquifer Authority triggered its first ever Stage 5 emergency, the highest drought level in the group's history. Pumping cuts of 40 to 44% were put in place across the San Antonio and Uvalde pools. The aquifer was nearing levels not seen since 1956, the single worst year of the drought of record. 80 miles northwest of Canyon Lake, another line quietly fell. Jacob's Well, one of the hill country's best-known natural landmarks. A vertical karst spring that normally pushes water upward through a shaft in the limestone recorded zero flow in December 2025. That spring has only gone fully dry 5 times in recorded history. The Trinity Aquifer feeding it, the same aquifer that most hill country residents outside the Edwards system depend on for their home well water, is one of the most stressed water systems in the state and faces growing pressure over the next 50 years. The underground picture is clear. The aquifers are draining. The springs are weakening. Comal Springs in New Braunfels, normally the largest spring system in the entire state of Texas, has dropped to just 57 cubic feet per second, far below its normal averages. San Marcos Springs, farther downstream, reads 73. Both are fed by the Edwards Aquifer, and both supply anywhere from 30 to 80% of the Guadalupe River's base flow, depending on conditions. When those springs slow, the river downstream of Canyon Lake slows with them. Farming, city water supply, and factories all the way to Victoria and San Antonio Bay depend on that flow, and every one of those numbers feeds back into the same lake. Canyon Lake is not just losing water to drying. It is losing the underground supply system that was supposed to keep its feeder rivers alive between storms. The rock that made the hill country beautiful is the same rock that makes it deeply exposed to long-lasting drought. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover water crises and geography events like this every week, with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. Enter the other side of the collision. During the 1950s drought of record, the worst drought Texas had ever measured, Comal County had a population of roughly 17,000 people. Canyon Lake did not even exist yet. The dam was not finished until 1964, after that drought had already ended. The lake has never been tested by conditions like the 50s. It was born into a world that thought the drought of record was behind it. Comal County's population has now passed 200,000. That is a 12-fold jump over the number of people who lived here during the last drought of this size. New Braunfels, the county seat, sits along the Interstate 35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio. and has been one of the fastest-growing cities in America for over a decade. Housing projects have been spreading across the limestone hills without pause, each one hooking into a water system that traces back, directly or not, to the same shrinking supply. Ryan Spencer of Comal Conservation has been tracking that math for years. During the 1950s, 17,000 people lived in Comal County, and it was the worst drought anyone had ever seen in Texas. Now, the county is living through conditions that match the drought of record, but with over 200,000 people drawing from the same land, same drought, 12 times the demand. And the lake that was supposed to soak up the gap between supply and need was not even built until after the last big one ended. The numbers only grow when you zoom out past the county line. Nearly 1 million Texans rely on water managed by the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority across its 7,300 square mile service area, which spans 10 counties along the I-35 corridor. San Marcos draws 75 to 80% of its city water from Canyon Lake during drought, pumped through a 24-mile GBRA pipeline from Lake Dunlap to a treatment plant rated at 21 million gallons per day. Bourne gets roughly 75% of its supply through GBRA's Western Canyon Water Treatment Plant, linked by 45 miles of pipeline to a 10 million gallon per day plant. Texas Water Company serves 78,000 people through 26,000 hookups across 7 hill country counties, all of them pulling from the same water system, all of them still growing. And the very pipelines and treatment plants that made 2 decades of hill country building possible also created 2 decades of stacking demand on a system that is now taking in the lowest flows in over a century. The same growth that brought tax money and energy to the hill country also brought thirst that the water system was never built to handle under drought of record conditions. And in March 2025, one company decided the math no longer worked. Andrea Williams, the president of Texas Water Company, took an action with nothing like it before in the region. Texas Water Company cut off water service to 9 planned housing projects across Comal County, hitting an estimated 4,182 planned home lots. Projects that had been planned, marketed, and in some cases partly graded were told that TWC could not promise them steady water. The company's stance was clear. Its first duty was making sure that current customers could turn on their faucets and get water. It could not make that promise if it kept adding hookups to a system already under strain. That choice blew up across local politics. Canyon Lake's water levels became a defining issue in the New Braunfels mayor's race. Challenger Michael French made Canyon Lake the center of his campaign, warning that the lake was quickly vanishing and that current use patterns could not keep going. Mayor Neil Lennertz fired back with a separate engineering study showing that water supplies were enough through full build-out and well past the city's long-term planning window of 2070. 5. Both claims hold pieces of truth. That is exactly what makes this collision so hard to sort out. The engineering confidence Lennertz leaned on rests heavily on GBRA's newest and most costly water project, the $400 million Carrizo groundwater supply project. That project, which broke ground in 2020 and began sending water in late 2024, pumps 15,000 acre-feet per year of groundwater from the Carrizo aquifer in Gonzales and Caldwell counties, roughly 60 miles southeast of the hill country. New Braunfels Utilities gets 8,000 acre-feet each year from those Carrizo wells, spreading the city's supply well beyond Canyon Lake alone. The official stance from GBRA, through Deputy General Manager Jonathan Stinson, is clear. Canyon Lake holds plenty of water for its locked-in water supply customers, and in a strict sense, that is right. The lake holds years of supply above dead pool, even under worst-case draining paths. At the fall 2025 loss rate of 75 million gallons per day, Canyon Lake would take roughly 960 days to reach dead pool. At the current winter rate, it stretches past 6 years. The 90-day countdown does not survive contact with those numbers. The trouble is that none of those forecasts account for what happens when every piece moves at once. If water intake stays at century lows while drying keeps climbing with heat, that is setting new records every 12 months. If people keep coming while the water system keeps shrinking, if the Carrizo aquifer, now being pumped at large scale, for the first time in its history, holds up at those rates over decades rather than just the first 2 years of use. GBRA is already pushing for a Carrizo growth to 24,000 acre-feet per year. And Gonzales County residents are fighting the permits, worried about their own wells and farm water being drained to supply hill country housing projects and swimming pools. The Gonzales County Commissioner's Court has openly opposed GBRA's leadership setup, taking the stand that unelected board members picked by the governor should not have the power to pump water from one region to serve another without local say. It is a fight over who owns the water beneath the ground, and it is only getting louder as the drought deepens. Beyond the Carrizo wells, GBRA is working on the long-term mid-basin water supply project, a huge effort that would combine surface water, groundwater, off-channel storage, and aquifer storage and recovery to eventually send up to 75,000 acre-feet per year. New Braunfels Utilities, the city, and GBRA launched a joint program in August 2023 called One Water New Braunfels, which treats all water flows, drinking water, used water, storm runoff, as a single linked system to get the most reuse and cut the most waste. These are serious, well-funded answers to a real problem. They are also bets on systems that take years to build, landing on a timeline that the drought does not respect. State Senator Donna Campbell opened yet another front. In February 2026, she sent a formal demand to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality after Lennar Homes filed a request to release 600,000 gallons per day of treated used water into Canyon Lake's drainage area for an 850-home project near Fisher. Campbell wanted a full water system review of Canyon Lake. No such review has ever been done in the lake's 62-year history. The money damage spreading from the shrinking shoreline is already showing up in the numbers. At the record low in May 2025, all 23 public boat ramps around Canyon Lake had closed. Concrete ramps that once reached into the water now ended dozens of feet above dry, cracked lake bed. Only Canyon Lake Marina's members-only Ramp 19 stayed open. Cranes Mill Marina moved its entire setup 1,000 feet farther out just to stay in water. As of March 2026, only 3 ramps have reopened. Dustin Smith runs a boat cleaning business called Below the Belt Services along the lake. The lake has never been this low since it was first filled in the 1960s. The biggest problem is simple: nobody can get on the water. Smith is still booked for now, but the boats sitting in driveways with nowhere to launch are not going to last as customers forever. Home prices have tracked the waterline downward. The middle sale price around Canyon Lake fell 6.9% year over year to $424,000, with homes sitting on the market for 161 days compared to 130 before the drought got worse. The farming damage reaches well past the shoreline. Texas's cattle herd has dropped from 13.1 million head in 2020 to 12 million in 2024. A loss of more than 1 million animals as ranchers across the state sold off herds they could no longer water or feed. In western Comal County, long-running ranches are watching wells drilled decades ago into the Trinity Aquifer go dry for the first time in anyone's memory. And Canyon Lake is not even the most pressing water emergency in Texas. Right now, Corpus Christi, 3 hours south along the Gulf Coast, has seen its combined lake storage at Choke Canyon Reservoir and Lake Corpus Christi fall to 8.7% of total space. That city is truly facing the chance of running empty. Current forecasts show Corpus Christi could run dangerously low as early as May 2026. Governor Abbott issued emergency orders in March. The port city, which holds refineries, chemical plants, and a military base, is now trucking in emergency water supplies and racing to hook up backup sources. Medina Lake, west of San Antonio, sits at 4% full. Palo Duro Reservoir in the Panhandle holds 1.2. Lake Arrowhead near Wichita Falls is at 29%. Across the state, over 400 public water systems have put some form of water use limits in place. As of March 17, 2026, 82% of the entire state of Texas is classed as being in drought, nearly doubling from 47% just 3 months before. Roughly a quarter of that area is in extreme or exceptional drought, the 2 worst levels the United States Drought Monitor assigns. Texas state climatologist John Nielsen Gammon has been tracking the driving forces behind the fast spread. Lasting above normal heat and one of the driest 6-month spans on record across parts of the state have joined forces to push the drought deeper and wider at the same time. The March 2025 to February 2026 stretch set a new record for the hottest 12-month average temperature in Texas history, breaking data that goes back to 1895. That is not just a drought number, that is a climate signal. Higher starting temperatures mean more water lost to the air from every lake, faster moisture loss from every farm field, and more demand from every household running air conditioning and watering whatever is left of their lawn. The 1950s drought of record, the event that all Texas water planning is built around, lasted roughly 7 years and at its peak placed nearly the entire state in severe drought. But in the 1950s, Texas had fewer than 8 million residents. Today, it has over 30 million. The water systems that were built after the 50s drought, including Canyon Lake itself, were designed to stop a repeat. The question nobody planned for is what happens when a drought of that size arrives in a state with 4 times the people, higher starting temperatures, and growth patterns that took for granted the water would always be there. Canyon Lake is one piece of a statewide system being stressed at nearly every point at the same time. And the hill country, because of its karst rock, its 12-fold population growth, and its total reliance on a lake that has never lived through a drought of record, may be where these two forces finally meet. Robert Mace, head of the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University in San Marcos, has spent years studying the gap between Texas water planning and Texas water reality. The core problem is that Texas plans for the droughts of the past, not the droughts of the future. And with droughts expected to get worse as temperatures climb, the risk of Texas towns running out of water grows higher every single year. Canyon Lake is not running out of water in 90 days. It is something harder to fit on a headline. A lake 22 feet below normal, fed by rivers at their lowest levels in over 100 years, ringed by 200,000 people who were not here the last time things looked like this. The Carrizo pipeline is pumping. The limits are in place. The engineering models say the water holds, and summer is 3 months away.